Yes, so it's now recording. Yes, okay. Just to quickly introduce us a bit, right? We're mainly situated in Ghent University in Belgium, Flanders. And I am Bram van Turnhout, and I work together with Professor Matthew Shalkey, and we work mainly on the color aspect of this project, right? Or at least we have the experience on the color aspect. We work on the function of color, right? And for this particular project, it's mainly working on the thermoregulation aspect of it. How do colors influence the way an organism heats up or cools down? But also in terms of how do they produce the color, the real mechanistic aspect of it. Is it pigmentary? Is it structural? What kind of pigments are in there? And it's also the idea that we're going to focus on that in this particular project as well. And of course, we work together with Professor Dries Bonte and other people in the lab, like Peter van Tichem and Katrien de Wolf. Katrien, who is doing a PhD on this particular project. And they have experience and abundant experience on spatial ecology, on dispersal, and using arthropods, and also the European garden spider as a model, right? There's some previous experience there. We've also teamed up with Angela Chuang from the University of Florida to be a bit or at least aid us in North American contacts and in the entire project, of course, as well. We're working together with nature organizations, with the Belgian Arachnological Society, because in one part, and I'll explain that in just a bit, in one part, Spin City is also a citizen science project, right? That's now being extended towards scientists across the world. And for that, we received some funding from the Flemish government to specifically fund a citizen science approach. But we also got some recent money to do the more fundamental background of it by the Flemish Research Agency. Also, I mean, this is a quite informal meeting, right? So if you have any questions or anything that pops up, you can put it in the chat or just interrupt me and then we can discuss, right? Maybe to just further introduce our lab, and in this case, our labs a bit further. So I'm situated at the EON lab, the Evolution and Optics of Nanostructures, and we're working together, with, of course, with the Terrestrial Ecology Lab. And our aim is really to develop the Araneus diadematus, the European garden spider, into a bit more of a model system. There's lots that's already been known, or that's already known on this particular spider, but also surprisingly a lot not known. So it's a very common spider, very easily found in a way, at least from my experience in Europe, it's very abundant. But there's a lot of things that we don't know, right? So we're looking into different research lines and we're developing them right now in terms of color production. So like I said, really looking into the bottom, getting into the bottom of how they produce these colors, right? You can see this little spider on the bottom. You can clearly see the guanine crystals that are causing the very whitish coloration because these reflect the light. And a lot of reflection of light causes a very bright color. And then you see a gradient of darker coloration, which is most likely pigmentary. But that's something we're developing now and looking at. We're also looking at their activity patterns. When are they active? And does that differ between cities and the surrounding rural areas? And this is in strong conjunction, of course, with artificial light at night. And we're also starting to look at their light preference. Furthermore, we're developing a research line on population genetics. Katrien, who's a PhD on this, I already mentioned her, is looking at prey availability and macronutrient quality, if that is different between cities and outside of cities, because this could directly impact, of course, their fitness, but also their color production. And in association with Aarhus University from Denmark, we're also tentatively looking at their microbiome, if there are differences there. And you can see some of the papers that are already written on it by our lab, but in general, there's a lot of going on this particular species, right? One thing that we really have an advantage of is that we can use a previously designed sampling approach, like you can see on the right lower corner of the screen. It has been developed in a larger broad urbanization project that wanted to look at these effects in a range of animals, from aquatic to terrestrial animals, moths, birds, I think, grasshoppers, spiders. There was an entire range of taxa that were sampled on these specific locations, including cross spiders. So for the current field season, we're also going to reuse this particular sampling design that consists of of different urbanization levels on large and small scales. I'm going to admit some more people. Yes. So just put it a bit more in a broader context, and those of you who have seen my talk at the American Arachnological Society will recognize this figure. We're situated in Flanders, right, in Belgium, in the center, nicely in the center of Europe. And to study urbanization, we're ideally suited. It's not always nice as a biologist to say this, but currently I think Flanders is one of the most populated regions in Europe. And is also one of the regions with the highest build-up area. Currently we have 28.3% of the area or the surface of Flanders is consisting out of hard substrates, or at least of buildings. So literally outside of your door, we have a gradient of urban to mainly rural, not even natural, I would say. And this is regarded by us, right? It's of course a challenge, but we can also see it as an opportunity to use these cities as living labs and to see how and if organisms can adapt to it. And I think most people know this, right? That urbanization can have a variety of selection pressures, a variety of effects on these particular animals trying to survive and adapt in cities, right? There's light pollution, right? Artificial light at night, which is particularly interesting for spiders. There's sound pollution, which is actually also getting a bit more attention towards spiders, right? What are the effects of this noise, this sound on their web vibrations, for example? There's like heavy metal pollution, any other kind of pollution that affects the individual, of course. There's human food. There's a change in diet, which is also particularly relevant for our study because we see differences in prey within a city compared to outside of cities. There's an interaction with the microbiome, and in terms, this influences the interactions with humans, of course. There's one effect that is very clear in cities that is not mentioned on the previous figure, and that is one that is really central to our project, right? To the Spin City project, really aims to investigate the urban heat island effect. And it boils down to a very simple idea, right? Or a very simple hypothesis, right? That the city is hot and the countryside is cool. We're very lucky here in Ghent that we can work together with Steven Collewaerts from the MOCA network, who investigates exactly this in the city of Ghent. So he put up 6 weather stations across Ghent. You can see those with the black dots or the black markings on the map. And they're especially put there to provide input for models that want to model and simulate this particular urban heat island effect. So on the left side, you can see the heat island effect of Ghent at night. And on the right side, you can see it during the day. And you can see that indeed, during the night, it's much more pronounced. Right? The city retains its heat and only slowly releases it back to the surroundings. So that causes it to be a much higher difference during the night than during the day. But still, during the day, it's still in the order of a couple of degrees. The large red area on the left side and the large bluish area on the right side during the day is, of course, the harbor, where there's a large mass of water, which is in comparison with the surroundings, hotter during the night, but very cool during the day. In case you were wondering what this difference is. So our study subject is the European garden spider, or the cross spider, as we call it locally. Of course, to us, it's an ideal study subject. I think everybody has a very nice and fond affinity with their own study subject, but this one is particularly good, I think, because, of course, if you want to investigate urban areas, you need a species that's also present in these urban areas. And that's the case for this one, right? So we find it in a seriously large range of habitats, so both man-made as in more natural environments. They have a holarctic distribution, which makes it nice for the Spin City for Scientists project, that we can actually select or actually go sampling in a lot of different cities across the world almost. They're presumed day active, which is also nice because then we know that their color interacts with the sun, that there are different ways that they could be impacted by solar energy, as I will explain in a bit. But our recent investigations, our last field season, showed that they're actually also way more night active compared to what we previously thought, which is also important in terms of adapting towards city life. They're easily found. They're relatively common, at least I can speak for Europe, where we are situated. And I think across Europe, they're quite common. And if you can't easily find the spider, you can easily find its web. It makes a very large orb web, which is very striking. And the ones you find the spider, it's easily identified, right? So there's little, at least again for Europe, there's little other spiders that can be confused with it in terms of size and the very distinct cross that's on its back. Very important for this particular project is, of course, that it has an extensive color variation. You really find very pale individuals, or you really find a range of very pale individuals to very dark spiders. And it seems to be continuous. So there's an entire range of color variation, which is, I think, not that common in spiders and one of the best examples to my knowledge. So, like I mentioned briefly at the beginning, Spin City was actually conceived as a citizen science project, right? We launched in Flanders in 2019, in September 2019, because that's a bit the peak of the cross spider abundance, at least here. And we basically asked people to take pictures of spiders. We developed an app for that, a Spider Spotter app, from which we can take or extract all the data we need and we want. So we're basically looking at spider color, at their body size, and at their web, and try to relate that to urbanization. And we also developed some educational packages and try to get as many people to join in, of course. But from there, right, we have quite a lot of data, and that's very nice. We were very happy with the numbers that we got from Flanders. But from there, and realizing that we have the app, right, which is worldwide, it has a worldwide map on it, which is actually a very easy field tool to input data in. We kind of got the idea to do a Spin City for scientists. So in a way, you don't have to be a scientist, really. Everybody can join in, but the idea was to target small groups or individuals with a very specific scientific and rigorous approach of performing a transect in different cities across Europe and Northern America. To really get into more detail, to really understand these patterns that we see in Ghent, because we've been mainly working in Ghent, of course, in our hometown, if you like, and see if these can be replicated, right? And if you do that, if you have enough replicates across latitudes and altitudes, you can look at these effects and see if they actually do have some importance there. Moreover, we can start looking at city sizes. Does the size of a city play a role? You could expect that the larger a city gets, the stronger the selection pressure is that is caused by an even stronger urban heat island effect. Does the structure matter? Is a park in the middle of a city really alleviating this urban heat island effect? Are there coastal effects, lake effects? All these things would be nice to have at least some info on, right? So that's a bit the broad idea of where it comes from. And we started with that in 2020, and it was really a bit of a starting year. We learned a lot from it. We got the ball rolling in a way. And we got already some very nice data, and I will show them in just a few slides from transects in Belgium, from the UK, from Denmark, from Slovenia, from the Netherlands, and really a lot of people have contributed already to this project in any way, right? There's also some people that had bad luck with weather. There was a very long wet and cold streak in September, October, also here in Belgium. And especially with the COVID restrictions, a lot of people were not able to do the transects that they were planning to. So we got limited info, but already very interesting. And I would very much like to thank anyone who already contributed in any way, even just trying and go out and seeing someone, trying to find some spiders. A huge thank you for that. So 2021 for us is a bit more of the follow-up year, but really the year where we're going to get at, how do you say it, a bit of a higher level, if you like, with now almost or around 80 interested collaborators. And of course, interested doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to also do a transect. So we'll see where we end up with, right? But even 10, 20, 30, or 40 transects would be very interesting to compare already. You can see that the list of countries to which the interested collaborators belong to is already quite nice and shows a very nice spread across Europe and the US. So we'll see what happens, and hopefully we'll have a good field season this year. So just to show you, we have very straightforward hypotheses to quickly show these or to discuss if you would like to. We expect spiders in the city to be or to have a lighter color. That works from the thermal melanism hypothesis, right? In a way that lighter spiders will heat up less. They reflect more light from the sun. They absorb less energy, and in that way stay cooler. And if you're in a surrounding like a city, which is already hot, it's very good to keep cool, right? It's the same idea, like if you compare the hood of a white car or the hood of a black car in summer, if you put your hand on it, you'll noticeably feel that indeed the black car will have a much higher temperature. And it's the same way, especially for ectothermic animals. This is very, it's the same way for spiders, and very important for them not to overheat. So that's our really base hypothesis. And the second thing we're looking at is actually the cross sizes. And our first hypothesis was that it would also be larger in cities, because the white of the cross is very reflective. And more reflection means more cooling down. But after seeing the first results, we'll actually have to adjust this hypothesis a bit in a way that we consistently see, or at least in most of our data, it suggests that the city spiders have smaller crosses. And that could be interesting because the cross production, it has not been tested. We're going to do that in the lab this year, hopefully. But it is suggested that the guanine crystals that are, or of which the cross is made of, is an end product of the protein metabolism of the spider. Is actually a storage way of storing these end products, these waste products, if you like, inside the body. So it could be that if there's less, or at least fewer protein-rich prey available in cities, that they're just not able to make large crosses. So that's a bit our altered second hypothesis, that there actually are smaller crosses in a city. Now, what we also expect is smaller spiders in the city. They have less prey there. And also from the urban heat island theory, it should be regarded that that there is a selection for smaller body sizes because they thermoregulate more efficiently. So there's also selection for that. And we also do have some preliminary evidence for this. And the fourth hypothesis, or at least the fourth thing that we expect, is that spiders will produce smaller meshes in a city. We've already found, and that's in one of the papers that I showed you, that indeed prey in a city is smaller. I don't think it's necessarily, if I remember correctly, it's not necessarily less prey, but they're at least smaller. So these very large species are absent in cities, which would be very important for spiders. These life-saving catches, if you like, these are absent. So a smaller mesh size it could be viewed as an adaptation to city living in a way that it will increase capture efficiency of very small prey. So I told you that we had some preliminary results, and I just want to show you data from 4 sampling locations. One is Bruges in Belgium, about 120,000 inhabitants. And you can see that is the transect that was sampled. In this case, it was sampled by students from Ghent University for a spatial ecology course, which I think they really loved doing it because it teaches them about spatial ecology, but it also got them to work with an active and ongoing research project. So they were very happy to contribute to an actual ongoing project. So they went from the center to outside, but I'll talk about transect design in just a bit. We also have some data from Ghent, Belgium. There we didn't do a transect. I mean, we did a couple of transects, but most of the data that I'm going to show you is based on a random selection of spiders across Ghent and the outside. We also have received input in the form of a transect from Aarhus, Denmark, where they also went from center towards more the big lake that is there, which is interesting because a lake, like I showed you in the first, or in the urban heat island effect, that a lake should cool down everything surrounding it. So that's also something, if we find or have enough cities with lakes or coastal effects in this way, in this case as well, if we have enough transects that we can say something about that as well, would be very interesting. And then the second one or fourth one, sorry, is in Ljubljana in Slovenia, which is a very interesting city, I think, because it doesn't look like there's a very large surface area of build-up or of build-up substrates and surfaces, right? So they followed a transect from the center again, going more north. It's interesting because it seems to be more higher elevation. There seems to be wooded areas, a very large park really going into the center of town. So there, in a way, you would expect less of an urban heat island effect and also less of an effect on these spiders. But of course, that's the thing we have now is that, or that's the data we have is limited to these four, and it's a bit soon to draw any very firm conclusions on it, right? So we need a bit more replicates, but this is already an interesting thing to start with. So just to show so some data on color. So the data that I'm showing here is the difference between the cross, which is white in general, and the surrounding color. So it's the contrast. So if you look at the graph in the left upper corner, it means that the more higher you go up in the x-axis, it means more darker spiders, while on the y-axis we go from more natural areas. This is urbanization on this axis. More natural areas, lower amount or lower levels of urbanization, going into higher levels of urbanization. And that's the case for all of these graphs. What we have for Belgium, at least, is that for Bruges and Ghent, we can calculate urbanization in different radii surrounding the location of the spider. We have a land use map that we can calculate the build-up area, which is very accurate, which shows the buildings and stuff. For Denmark and Slovenia, we don't have this map, and we're still also thinking about, and that's something that could also be interesting to discuss, is how to quantify urbanization in different countries. Right? So we'll probably use a combination, or at least input from satellite pictures to really accurately quantify the effect of urbanization, or at least some urbanization level. So what we see is that for Bruges, there's not a huge effect, or no effect at least on color. There is an almost significant effect for Ghent, in which indeed spiders that occur in more urban areas are lighter. So the gradient you see on the dots here is also a lighter color, and a darker color resembles the color of the spider. There's no effect in Denmark. There's also no effect in Slovenia. Now, if we look at there's also a different way, another way in Belgium that we can look at urbanization, and that is we get models from the Flemish research, from the Flemish Environmental Agency, where they model in the same spots the temperature. So that's not urbanization, but temperature then that we look at. And if we do that for the same data, we see that there is an effect of color in the way that if temperature increases, the average temperature over the month of September, if that increases, then indeed spiders become lighter. And this is all still very preliminary, right? We still have to look at it from a spatial dependency point of view, though we found that in first results, there's not a lot of spatial dependency, at least for Ghent. But this will, of course, take a much more broader approach in terms of using or also including time, location as variates in this model, right? So very preliminary, but I think it already gives a nice idea of how these different cities and different city characteristics could influence these spider characteristics. So for cross sizes, so this is actually the proportion of the cross length versus or divided, or the proportion is calculated as the length of the cross divided by the total abdomen length. So if you like, the proportion of the abdomen that consists of a cross. And again, for Bruges and for Ljubljana, there's not a lot of effect. So there's no effect, which could partially also be a limit in sample size, right? In this case, but both for Ghent and for Aarhus, you see a very strong effect that indeed, like I already mentioned, city spiders have smaller crosses, which could be related to their prey intake. But that's something we want to test, and that's something that Katrien is going to test. So for Denmark, right, ID here, like I said, means that's just following the transect, right? So that's a transect going from outside to inside the city. And here you can see that indeed also the crosses with a very strong effect, the crosses become much smaller inside the city. We're also going to look at spider length, where we expect strong effects as well. And interestingly, I mean, again, for Bruges, almost significant effect for Bruges, and for not significant for Slovenia. And again, maybe a sample size issue here, but also could be the fact that in Ljubljana there isn't a very strong urban heat island effect, but we don't know at the moment, of course. Interestingly, for Ghent, no effect. It's a bit strange that we don't see these effects, or at least there's a reduction in spider length or in size, and a very strong effect in Aarhus, Denmark, right? Again, going from outside the city to inside, they drop really 0.2 centimeters in length. And even besides looking at this urbanization, the fact that we're going to sample in different geographical locations in a very similar way, right? If we start from a city and then go outside, so that means we're sampling it's not standardized, but at least we're sampling both city and so urban and more rural areas. This also allows us to look at it a bit more from a macroecological point of view and actually look at if you like, averages or differences between these locations, right? And this is very interesting to show that, or these show that spiders in Ljubljana tend to be bigger than the ones in Aarhus, Bruges, or Ghent. So again, even besides these urbanization effects and getting a bit more to grips with what cities do with these spiders, we'll also be able to see some latitudinal effects on a very large scale. Right? That would be very interesting to see if this holds up across, for example, Europe, across Northern Americas. So we also have some data for mesh sizes. So do these animals, do these spiders really adapt to the prey availability by making larger or making webs with larger or smaller meshes? For Bruges, we don't have any evidence for that. We do have evidence for Ghent that this is, according to our hypothesis, right, smaller meshes in the city, right? So that indeed they adapt in a way that we think they do. But very interestingly, if you remember those spiders from Aarhus, where there was a very large effect of size or a very high size decline towards the center of town, there's no difference in their mesh size. These tend to make the same, or they make the same type of webs, or at least the same type of webs in terms of mesh sizing. And especially, and what is very apparent is also that the one in Bruges are maybe a bit larger, the one in Ghent, than the one in Ghent, but the one in Aarhus in general are very small. They're only 0.3 centimeter in width, while these in Bruges are a bit larger, and these in Ghent are a bit smaller in between. And again, this is very preliminary, right? We have to take different sampling times into account, but I think this kind of shows the strength of the project and what we potentially could achieve, right? If we have enough transects and really answer these questions. If we get more transects from Scandinavia, is there some effect there on mesh size? How consistent is it, or is it linked to certain city aspects, right? And that's just to say, right, to say again that if you look at the Belgian ones, you could also argue that there might not be a sufficient gradient, right? There's not a lot of nature left here in a way. If you go from center to more outside, you're still in agriculture areas. That could have an effect. But then if you go to Denmark, there could be a Scandinavia effect in a way that I wonder if the urban heat island effect is not stronger in colder environments, could cause a larger temperature difference, and this in turn cause a much stronger selection pressure on these animals. But you could also have the lake effect here. I think Ljubljana, Slovenia is very interesting, as this could be an example of a city where there's not a very strong urban heat island effect. So it would be nice to compile many more transects and see what it does, right? But just to show a bit the idea behind it. Now, if you choose, now I'd like to give a bit more info on if you choose to participate in this project, what is actually in a way expected from you, right? And like I mentioned in the beginning, the first thing that we would like you to do is to let us know if you would like to receive these spider spotter cards. We can send them to you. Angela has made a Google form that you can fill in and send it to us, and we will send them to you to your address or whatever you like at university or home address. For the reasons I already mentioned, right? For consistency and for having a similar standard for everyone. So we can send many if necessary. We can send a lot of them. So that's the first thing, right? And that way we also know that you want to participate, and then we can take that into account. I'll I just got a question from Mario. If you could put the link here, yeah, we'll also send out an email after the meeting with the link to the Google form, and also with a document that is a more written out version of Transact design and how to use the app. So I was going to mention that, but we're going to send an email around to everyone that's interested with this additional info, right? And then also with the link to the Google form. So a second thing then that we would expect you to do is establish this sampling Transact, right? And I'm just going to quickly describe one for Brussels. You can go to Google Maps, right, and select your city or look for your city. And the idea is a bit that you could look for or that you design the location of a representative Transact from the city center to the surroundings. Now this is a bit depending on the city, and I think local people will be able to judge this very nicely in terms of what is feasible, right? Where are the spiders in your area? Where do you have access to? But the general idea is that you go from really the center, square, some churchyard, stuff like that, to really outside towards, if possible, a natural area. So rather not going towards agriculture areas, but more towards if possible, wooded or at least less building or open field area if possible. And for that, we kind of devised a standardized approach, which is flexible, right? We can discuss this in individual instances without, we can be flexible about it. Is what we actually suggest to do is take the center of town towards the suburbs, approximately, and then do this distance or take this distance and do it ×2. And why ×2? The idea is, of course, that the gradient that the Transact spans would be enough to follow or to actually see a gradient in the urban heat island effect. Because if you look at the one from Ghent, which is also on the slide now, you can see this is really an effect that goes over, that is on a kilometer scale, right? It's pretty large. And the idea of the Transact is to make sure that we cover enough distances outside of the city to be able to see a proper gradient in urban heat island effect. Okay, so I think I haven't measured it yet, but if you look at the gray figure, I think if you go from left to right on this spot, I think in Ghent this is about 5 kilometers, something like that. So that's really the scale where this urban heat island effect works on, and that's also the idea that the Transact should span it and try to get a full variability in these effects. But it's not set in stone, right? It's just to give an idea. Again, to be a bit standardized, we decided on 41 recording locations. So if you, in this case, the distance from the center to the suburbs was about 4.2 kilometers. If you do that ×2, we're at 8.4 kilometers. If you divide that by 40, because we're aiming for 41 sampling locations, we'll get a Transact for every 210 meters, which I think is okay. But it's also a more of a suggestion, right? But if you could follow that could be nice. So that's the idea, to really span this entire range, and also to keep the workload a bit under control, right? Then you know that there's 40 sampling locations and that you can plan for how to reach them and how to find them, right? But like I said, it can be flexible and we can adapt it to specific city requirements, right? So you're very much welcome, and we would very much like to help you and assist in Transact design. If you have an idea for a Transact and you would just want to run it by us and to see if it's okay, we can very much like to help you with that. Okay, then if the Transact is designed, right? So the idea is then that we use the app as a data input tool. You can find it on Google Play in the App Store, so it's both on iOS and Android. And that's really the main tool that you'll need in the field. Right? The idea is that if you arrive at your sampling location, that you spend the first 20 minutes in looking for spiders in a 100-meter radius around your Transact, your Transact point or your Transact location. We suggest, or we would like to keep that to 20 minutes in total, right? So if you're 3 people or 3 persons, then that could be divided by 3. If you're doing an individual location search, that should be 20 minutes in total then. or until 3 spiders have been found, right? If you find 3 spiders in the first 5 minutes, then you can stop, and then that's the count of spiders for that particular location. So for any location, you have the option of saying you have 0, 1, 2, or 3 of these spiders that are found. If you don't find any in 20 minutes time, of course, then it's a 0. In a previous approach, we suggested to only look at spiders that were present in their web hub, that are active. That's the ones that we call active. But having some experience and having done it a couple of times myself now, it sometimes can get a bit frustrated in a way that you can see a web and you can see the spider in the vegetation, because if you follow the signal line towards the vegetation, you can actually easily find the spider. That it's a bit frustrating, and in a way also not really correct, is that if those spiders are not active, that you should log it as being absent while you can clearly see them, right? We did that at first from a citizen science point of view, not to complicate things, and also not to have people really have to go into vegetation, try to identify spiders or try to look for them. But as we're working with more scientifically educated people, I think if possible, and of course that's up to you, you can definitely decide that if you would like to do that or not, you could look for webs and then look for the spiders themselves and log them in that way, right? Just to say that in the past, we really focused only on the active spiders in the web hub, but at this point, I think it would be more correct and a bit less frustrating, at least for me, that would be the case, to find them, to find webs and try to find them in the nearby vegetation. At least for Flanders, for Belgium, large orb webs, it boils down to a couple of species that can make them, or that are making them in September, October. So there's not a lot of different species that should be able to, or that are making these large orb webs in that time. So the next step would then to be to take the web measurements, right? Because the next and the following step is to take the spider pictures, but during picture taking, it is possible that the web gets destroyed. So important to first take or measure the web. And it's two very straightforward measurements that we're asking of you. Is first to measure the vertical radius. Yeah, in lack of a better word, the vertical radius meaning the upper part of the catching spiral, right? The length of the catching spiral. So really not from the web hub, but really from the first thread of the catching spiral going up to the last thread. So that length should be measured, and you can also use the card for that. There's a measuring line on it. And then in the second measurement, or count actually, is to count the number of crossing threads that go past that line, or that cross that line, because in that way, if you divide both, right, you'll get a nice average mesh size out of it for that particular web. So you'll see, of course, meshes are not always the same size. There's some variability, but at least for that, a nice average web or mesh size can be calculated. It's also important, especially at the end of the year, at the end of the season, that to check whether webs are intact or not. If they just caught the prey, the catching spiral, or the threads could be entangled. They could be coiled because of wind, of rain. So try to, if you like, try to assess that for yourself, right? If that's an intact web or one that's already been a bit more destroyed, because I would just increase the mesh size on average. So you've arrived at your location, you've counted the spiders, then you've measured the web, and then it's actually the idea to do the most important part, although the mesh size is also very important, but to take the picture of the spider. And for me personally, I've done quite a few now. It works best if I nudge the spider out of the web with a stick and just let it drop on the petri dish. Or if you find it in the vegetation, just nudge it out of the vegetation and put it on a petri dish. After a while, it will calm down and sit still, which is very important for the picture taking. There is a bit of a learning curve there, right? Trying to hold the petri dish with one hand and then taking a picture with the other. But it's doable. If I can do it, I'm sure everybody can do it. The added value of having a still spider or in a petri dish is the fact that I put the spider spotter card on the bottom of the petri dish. That way, both the spider and the petri dish are in the same plane. And if you take a picture, then there's a really accurate size measurement that we can take by scaling the picture according to one of the scales that you see there, and then measuring the length of the spider. In a previous approach, we suggested to take pictures of the spider while it's in the web and holding the cart next to it. It is possible, but it's often the case that you just hold it even a tiny bit more towards the camera or a tiny bit more behind the spider. Well, behind the spider is less the case because then you would touch the web, but a bit more towards the camera, and that would actually cause a bias in calculating the spider length. It would make it smaller, right? It would cause scale to be much larger than the actual spider size. And in that way, the Petri dish, then it's already automatically in a way in the same plane. And that already solves that. It's just a tip. You can definitely think about it and use your own approach. But for me, that works. Also, the idea is to try and get or to avoid shade and to avoid overexposure of the picture. And in that way, also the Petri dish allows you to transport a little bit. You can put your body in between the sun or any other kind of environment that is annoying, and try to take a good picture that is not too blurry and not too overexposed or too shaded. In general, if we have the same lighting conditions on the spider and on one of the grayscales, then we could accurately correct for lighting differences, and in that way calculate color. That's the idea, at least for the color, is that we've been doing that, is that we're going to use the grayscales to correct for lighting differences. Another tip that works best for me is to take multiple pictures first and then select the best one. So there is an option in the app that you, while logging it, you can take a picture, but you can only take one. So if you only take one, then there's almost no chance that is going to be a very good one unless you're very experienced. So what I do is just I take some pictures of the same Petri dish, select the best one, and then when you log it in the app, there's a possibility there to go to the gallery or wherever you store your pictures on your phone and then select it and log it from there or upload it from there. It's just a tip for whatever works best for you. And then I try to put the spider back in the web. We have some evidence that their populations are not doing that well, so we're trying to be as non-invasive as we can here. Try not to, I mean, we're sampling some, right? We're not sampling too many. Okay, I think that was it for the picture taking ideas. I don't see any questions at the moment. So, and then that's basically it for you, right? We have access to the backend of the website. So the app logs everything there. From that, we can get coordinates, latitude, longitude, we get time, we get the picture itself, so we can download it from there as well. And then the idea is, of course, that we do the picture analysis, that we're going to calculate the length and the color variables, that we're going to look at the urbanization effects and calculate, or at least devise or quantify urbanization across or around that particular location. The idea, of course, is very much that the data will be openly available when we publish it. And of course, all the data that you collect yourself in the app, you can export all the data that you collect. It can, of course, be used, right? We're not going to say that you can't use that, but we would like to ask you to contact us if you're planning to do that, right? If you're planning a side experiment or whatever, to avoid overlap with this current study, if possible, just to see if we can do that. There's also a possibility, if you would like that, to engage students or to get support from us through online lectures, right? We can give a bit more info on it. Like we said, we use it in a spatial ecology course. It could be nice to give a bit more info on the background, on the theory, and then see how they can really implement it in the field, right? And of course, those persons, the idea is that a co-authorship will be offered to everybody who's participating in the Transact, to any publications that use the obtained data set. I think that's a given. So first of all, yeah, I really still want to thank you for your interest, just being here. I think it's very nice to see all of you. I have some more questions, remarks that we received from people that have written us. I would just want to go over them now just quickly to see if that might already answer some of your questions you have now, right? If someone, very enthusiastic people, want to do multiple transacts per city, I think that's very nice. We are extremely happy with one. But if you could replicate within a city, yes, that could be very interesting. We're doing that for Ghent. We're doing multiple transects to see how consistent transect can be, and if you can learn more from different transects. But of course, it all depends on your time. It very much depends on field season, weather, abundances of spiders. So, like I said, we're very happy with just one. If multiples can be very interesting as well. What is the lower size of a city to be included? Again, yeah, that's a very good question, right? It's one of the variables we want to test. It would be very interesting to see if we can get some knowledge or some info on how big a city, or even if these small areas could have significant effect on these spiders. I tested it in my hometown village, which is 2,000-3,000 people, which is not large at all. And I tend to see, I haven't looked at the data yet, but there were differences in city center spiders, if you can call it the center, and the ones that are a bit more outside. I think if you have any, or a candidate city should at least have a distinct urban center, that not just a street, but at least some area that is distinctly urban where the spiders are, and that allows for an urban-rural gradient. And if we have that, then I think it could be very interesting. Letitia, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, so you made the point that we should avoid agricultural areas. And at least here in Vancouver, if we stay at the same elevation, so my question is basically about elevation. If we go up in elevation, we should find like natural areas, but if we stay flat, going out of the city, we're gonna run into a lot of agricultural land. So how do we deal with that? And because then I presume you guys are gonna control for elevation also in the analysis?
Yes, yes. So we should be able to get that out of the map, right? I think that should be quite easy. But of course, it's a suggestion, right? Like for a lot of areas in Flanders or Belgium, we're bound to go into agriculture areas. And I think that will mainly be driven by the fact where the spiders are, because I don't know in terms of elevation if they're still there, right? Because they're very flat here, so I have no idea how high they get.
I was picturing that. So if there is a choice between staying at the same elevation, but the quality of the habitat is not that great, or going up in elevation where the habitat is better. Any comment on which would you take?
Yeah, I think it's both interesting in a way. You could argue that staying on the same elevation really shows the city effect, because otherwise you'll kind of mix up elevation and city. Right. But yeah, of course, then the city aspect or the urban heat island will also reduce.
Yeah, so better stay in the same elevation, I'm guessing then.
Yeah, that would be my, maybe my gut feeling in a way. But if they're not there, then it's a bit pointless in a way, right? So I think, I mean, we'll know for sure. I mean, we'll be able to correct for it. We're also thinking in the direction of trying to log areas as being agricultural. So we'll be able to do that. And we'll also be able to get elevation. So I think a point could be made to do it also for elevation, because then you might have a stronger effect, right? So yeah, I think, yeah, I would maybe say stay at the same elevation.
Yeah, we have to look at the map and see.
Yeah,
what we.
I can have a look if there's any elevation limits to their presence. I'm not sure, like how high they can live or they are found. Because of course it could also be very interesting to see how they do there, right?
But, yeah, that would be a different question.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Leticia, if I can cut in a second, I have seen Diatomatus at Golden Ears, which is one of the mountains around Vancouver. So I know they are on the mountains, maybe not the peaks, but like maybe if we head north up to the Lynn Valley area, it doesn't get too high when you hit forest and get out of the city.
Yeah,
they're there.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. And of course, yeah, it's also a good point that in that way you'll really get the urban heat island effect reduced, right? That will be significantly lower than in those areas. So yeah, I think whatever is feasible for you as well, right? In terms of these transects.
Yeah, there's a comment from Rebecca there.
Yes, I was just reading it. Yes, there's actually another question on the transect size, right? That I wanted to approach, and definitely for people in the US and in Atlanta, which is indeed very large, right? So if you take the standard approach, if you go from the city center to the suburbs, I don't know how much that is, at 30, 40 kilometers, something like that, times 2. Like I said, there's a couple of main ideas behind the transect. First of all, it's not at all very, I mean, it can be adapted and flexible. That's really the idea behind it. But the main goal is to have a sufficient urban-rural gradient, right? That we span that variation in urban heat island, but also to control the workload, right? That 40 sampling locations at most, so that you're not doing a whole bunch of, I mean, just to say, we think that depending on the city again, it should be 2 or 3 days, right? But for example, for these very large areas, what we could think about is just doing a smaller transect in the city center, and then one in the suburbs, and then one outside. Also spanning these 40, because of course, a lot of the time, investment will also depend on how much time you have to spend going from one spot to the next, right? We're a bit lucky here if it's only 8.4 kilometers. I think in an early day, late finish, you could do that in 1 day, right? If there's a bit of good weather, you could take the bike and go 200 meters between your sampling spots, and then 20 minutes on every sampling spot, and 10 minutes we think about that time for taking pictures and stuff like that. If you're a bit experienced in it, that is approximately 1 day, 2 days, 3 days at most, right? But of course, for these situations where you almost have to take a car in between sampling locations, or at least between regions, then we can definitely talk about doing discontinuous transects and take that approach. The most important thing is to get the variation.
Yeah.
Plus
I think that is that would make more sense for us, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that could still be analyzed in a very similar way, right? It's just going to be a bit different, but I think there's no reason in not doing it, I think. Okay. And the same idea would go for very small transects, right? So we were talking about these very small cities, or at least villages that some want to do, and I'm doing. Then you don't have to do 40, right? If it's only 2 or 3 or 4 kilometers into 40, then you almost get continuous or transect points that are laying right next to each other, right? So in that way, you could also reduce that number. You can do 20 or 10. I mean, try to do some that gives enough sample sizes, of course, but then also a continuous sampling could be done, right? Then we don't get any info on their abundances, but then we just know. Then we know that it spans the entire range of variability, or at least the urban heat island effect there. Because if it's 2 or 3 kilometers, you could just start walking and go outside and record all the spiders, right? So the app is able to do that, right? It just logs your location on a couple of meters. Very flexible in that way, right? And is there yeah? Sorry,
yeah, I have another question about. There's also going to be a latitudinal effect on the timing.
Yes.
So, like, yeah, yeah, you can control for that also in the analysis, but I guess we would have to think about like late August, September. How late in the season, at least in Europe, are they there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's something I have the feeling this year in Belgium they're late. We had a bit of a cold, wet streak in May, and extending a bit in June. And I'm still seeing spiderlings that look like they've hatched 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, that are very small. So now it's been a bit colder again. So I feel that they're going to be late this season again. So typically in Belgium, and it's really Central Europe, right? They're there. They're definitely adult in September, and I think the females get really large, packed full of eggs by mid-September, October, mid-October, something like that.
Oh, that's also the other thing is, do you want us to look at adults only?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is to do it in September, October at the adult females, right? So again, I can speak for Belgium. By end of September or by end of August, actually mid-September, most of the males have died, right? So mating occurs in August, and then they tend to die off. But it really depends, because last year they were really late as well. So I was still sampling end of October. So that really depends a bit. But that is approximately the timing, right? So adult females should be sampled, yes, because those are largest, easiest to find. Males are just wandering about at that time, right? So they're, every once in a while you'll see one, but not a lot. I was going to say something else still. And of course, yeah, what we also see is differences in Europe. So the Italian colleagues say they're a bit faster there. So they're going to sample already definitely end of August, because yeah, it should go faster there. I have a German colleague who says they're also faster, more inland, more continental areas. They should also develop faster. So I think that's also something that local people or you have a better idea of in your particular area. I'm following up on them now, right? I'm just keeping an eye on in my garden and stuff, how fast they go. And I will have a pretty good idea here. But for other areas, it's hard to say. But it would be good to see maybe if you have some kind of monitoring scheme, like we have observations.be that really shows year-to-year variation of when they're there. And that gives a bit of an indication, right? But I don't think in general that it should be the same timing, give or take, maybe a couple of weeks, a month or something like that. Right? But if you, I can also look into that, right? If that would be
No, we are actually doing a project right now with spiders near the university, so we will see them.
Okay. Okay,
so we are looking at the phenology and stuff like that, of different spiders, everything, not just the Aremarus.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So indeed, yeah, there's some aspects that need to be controlled. In a similar vein, almost, and in a smaller way, it's a smaller scale, is that if possible, if you could do that 1 day or 2 days consecutively, that would also be best, right? If not, it's not a huge deal. We can also account for that. If you want to do it over the course of a week, or maybe a week is already a bit large, right? But in a couple of days and do some transect points every once in a while, that's also fine. Of course, we're extremely happy with any contribution you make, right? But of course, if it's possible, those 2 days could be good to avoid really large differences in timing and maybe weather even, because that could impact their mesh sizes and activity, right? Their abundance.
This is the other question I had. Should we take temperature measurements? Because if that changes the mesh size, as you say, I mean, it's not going to change the spider, but it could change the web.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that influence it's a very plastic, it tends to be very plastic, right? Mesh size, wind, humidity, temperature, prey availability, prey abundance. If you can do that, that would be nice. We're not expecting that from everyone to do it. We're trying to keep it as simple as possible. We can always get it also, I guess, from weather forecasts from the area. That could be taken into account. And I think that would be the way to go, because in that way it's a bit standardized, but it's the same data for all of them. But yeah, if you want to, of course, that could be interesting, right? It's something we're looking at. We've actually done that in the field this year, is really look at the microclimatic variables where the web is situated, and see if that is different for city spiders, urban spiders. And you see a very large effect of temperature and humidity. Some spiders, it's 22 degrees or 20 degrees, and they suddenly are out in the web. Regardless, I mean, there isn't an interaction with the humidity actually. So, but yeah, it's just, I think, like I said before, we're very happy with any contribution and without making it too complicated. So if you want to, please, but if not, that's also fine, right? Let's see, what was the other one? Yes, so the minimum number of spiders, that's also a question we sometimes get. And indeed, it's hard to predict how many spiders you'll find, right? Of course, you'll need a certain number for us to be able to draw some inferences on really how does the city affect the spider variables. But on the other hand, even if you find very little, so what we saw is actually that certain areas in the UK, there were very little or a very low density apparently of these spiders. While in Denmark, in Aarhus, at least at one transect, right, they were finding almost 3 spiders, well, not on every single point, but in a lot of points. So that could also give some idea about how what their densities are and their fluctuations over large scales, right? There is evidence from a paper in Switzerland that they've been declining quite heavily, right? Quite severely even. That populations are now down to 99% of their original abundances or original densities. So that will also be an input that we can take into account, right? I'm just saying that even if you don't find a lot, every single location that has been searched, that will also give us input in how many there are there, right? Or how many there are found. So even if you log a lot of zeros, that could be interesting. Could be interesting also for yourself, maybe at some point later in time or a couple of years down the road, if you want to redo these areas, you have locations. It's ideally this would teach us a bit more about their population dynamics, right? Maybe even over several years, because the entire insect Armageddon, right, is this follow-up on insects. There's more data there on the insect group, or still even limited, but there's not a lot or almost nothing on spiders, right? So we're also trying to get some info on that. Just saying that even if you don't find a lot, every single point has value to the project, right? Even if it's all zeros. And then maybe a final remark or thing that we want to, also stress, of course, is as this occurs, right? This field sampling is in public spaces, right? Is to try, of course, and be safe, right, while doing it. If it's a private property that you can't access and your location happens to fall in there, that's not an issue. We can move it up. We can be flexible. Sometimes you get questions, right, either from passerbys or remarks, or maybe even more official representatives that ask questions. In principle, in Belgium, it's the case that anywhere you sample anything, but we're not sampling, right? So that's good. We're only taking pictures. You have to have permission. Either it's the local government or any kind of owner of the area. So we will provide a document describing a bit more in detail the goals and the setup of the project. Maybe you can also have something similar. I mean, we'll write that from the UGent University point of view, of course. Maybe you can add your own university to that or institution. And we'll also provide you with a flyer, maybe with a bit more of a how do you say, popular explanation of the research that you can hand out to any interested passerby or citizens, right? I also sometimes get the question I was asked once, what are you doing in my garden or in my hedge? And I just explained it and it was fine, but it's just, it's always nice to give something to them, right? And then there might be, it also serves a nice educational purpose, right? It might also be a good idea, depending on the area, of course, or if that's necessary in your region, I don't know, to wear recognizable clothing, maybe with a university logo, and maybe to check if you can take pictures at all these areas, right? I don't know if that's an issue. It's generally not where I've been, but you never know, right? Just something that we could think about. Okay. So yeah, that's a bit the idea. I hope, or just to give some background on the project, right? Again, a huge thank you that you're here and that you're interested. And should you decide on going through it, doing a Transact, definitely reach out to us. We'll send an email around with more details on the Google form and the additional documents that you can read through and then have a read for yourself, right? If you just want to get or see the info again. So and if there's no more questions, yeah, we're looking forward to seeing people interested and sending some cards out, right?
Bram, can I ask some question?
Sure, yeah, and if you have any more questions, yes, please.
Just one. I'm concerned that my hometown is too large.
Yes.
500,000 of habitants. So is it possible to engage some other cities from Serbia in this experiment, or no?
Yeah. I mean, you're completely free to decide where to do it, right? But I don't think it sounds too large. If it's something that 500,000, I think, yeah, that it would be a nice example of a very strong urban heat island, I think, depending on the structure of the city.
Well, yes, and I'm very concerned for the population of these spiders in Novi Sad because, well, I do not have proof, but as I see for years, the population declined heavily. Yeah.
That was also a bit our trigger to do this and include densities, because what we have been seeing, at least in Europe, but at least in Flanders, what we were looking at is that in 2018, 19, we had heat waves, right? And everybody that we talked to, and also the people from the Belgian Arachnological Society used to say, oh, there were many more in 2016, 17. And then we had 2 dry summers, and then I've been counting them in my garden. But this has no scientific value, right? It's all feel and a gut feeling that there are less, and there are less. I think that's for sure. But we need to start quantifying this. Otherwise, we'll never know if there really are less and how many. So yeah,
Well,
like I said, if that could already be very interesting info.
Okay, well, I do not have previous data to compare with, but
you have to start sometime.
Be a really good start point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course, then you can keep using it, right?
What?
You can keep using the app, and then for next year you can do the densities again. And I mean, these are almost all possibilities, right?
Okay, so yes, I'm very interesting, and I will contact you to arrange the transect as best as we can. So thank you.
Okay, that's very nice, Goran. Yes, I'm looking forward to seeing the transect, and then we can discuss it. And if you fill in the form, then we'll send these cards to you.
Yeah, I can. Very interesting project, and I'm certainly also very interested. But I can add, since I'm living in New York City, so transect design will be especially challenging. Yes. And also, the last 2 years, we have seen much more Neoscona crucifera. Okay. And I personally have actually not seen a single Arrhenius diadomatus in this city. So I think for me personally, my approach would be, to first scope a few spots, whether they are around, and then decide on some possible transect design, and then check back with you.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we can be, this could all happen very fast, right? If you happen to see them and then you have an idea, we can send them. We've sent some cards to Angela that can send from the US, but we can send them as well. So we can be very fast in reacting to that, right? I wonder, in the city, then you mean, you only see Neoscona? Or?
Yeah, so in the local parks, or wherever green spaces are, or on our campus, Neoscona is definitely there. Okay. Yeah, it's sometimes strange where you find these cross spiders. I have the impression that they just need some firm structure. You can see them on the gutter of a roof almost sometimes, and I often see them in cities. It's quite strange if you have a traffic sign and then a small hedge or a small bush underneath, which is even trimmed, then it's always making its web between the hedge and the post of the traffic sign, right? And then there can be no green for meters around, but then they're there and they're not doing that bad. So yeah, it's just it's sometimes strange where you can find them. So, and that's also maybe a general idea that is not necessarily, I mean, at least not to my experience, to really focus on these green areas in cities, right? We have an example here of a rather small park in Ghent, and it's full of them. I don't know why. It's the most impossible park, or at least the park that I wouldn't expect them to be in. And then there's a lot, and then there's larger parks that just don't have any. There's water nearby, so that might give a bit of a steady supply of flying insects. But yeah, it's sometimes very strange where to find them. So we're just sampling, we're just doing it really to transect, and we'll see where they are. And if they're there, then it's good. If not, then they're not. Yeah, it's really our approach to it. Awesome.
Yes. Okay, if there are not any more questions, then just going to check the chat. Oh, very nice, Martin. Thank you very much. Groningen. Could be really interesting with all the water there, right? In Groningen, if I remember correctly. Okay, so if you have any more questions, please contact us in any way, right? We're most happy to talk to you.